Vivek Ramaswamy is probably the most revolutionary political candidate that America has seen in well over a few decades, most certainly since Reagan, perhaps even before then, most certainly since Barry Goldwater. And I think that all Americans, but especially young Americans, should take note of that very fact. In fact, this is the point that I made on Larry O'Connor's Salem News Channel TV show not too long ago as the posting of this video, where I, as a member of Gen Z, a 23-year-old person who thinks and cares deeply about the future of our country, think that Vivek is the best shepherd to lead our government into the future. In fact, I will play a little bit of that clip right here.
Well, I think that Vivek is really hitting a nerve with my generation, primarily because Vivek talks about issues in a rather way that is uncharacteristic to the current state of American politics. Most politicians will talk about issues in a way that is superficial, that is surface level. He actually cuts right to the core, right to the heart of every matter, and does so in a manner that invokes critical thinking and also has evidences philosophical rigor. And as someone myself who wants to be a political commentator, who wants to sit in that chair that you're sitting in one day, Vivek inspires me to be the best version of myself. And really, I was actually listening to one of his speeches in New Hampshire last night, and half of it was about politics, but it wasn't about policy per se. It was about a vision for America. And then the other half was about personal motivation. He said that being a victim is a choice, but having hardship is not a choice. But hardship actually opens up the door for you to become a better version of yourself. That you have a politician talking like this is so uncommon. It's so rare, but it's so refreshing because our country is in dire straits and we need that kind of richness in our discussion.
Now, of course, much thanks to Vivek, he actually shared this clip on Twitter, and he actually said, "Thank you, Christian, for your kind words." And really, I wanted to make this video so I could explain a little bit further as to why I think that Vivek, again, should appeal to every American, but especially the younger generation that will inherit the nation in its current form and the nation as it continues to go throughout time and continues to accumulate problems that politicians, old world politicians like I call them, have been sicking upon us for the past 20, 30, 40, 50 years. Yes, I mean people like Mitch McConnell, and I mean people like Dianne Feinstein and Nancy Pelosi. But I also mean the mindset, more than the people, because as Vivek points out, the people ultimately are secondary to the ideas and the sources of our problems. And the sources of our problems come from, as I mentioned, ideas. They come from ideology. They come from systems. And these intellectual systems from the old world abide by a few rules. Number one, the orthodoxy is resolute and it is meant to be praised. This is why you see people in America, for example, whenever they're assessing a political candidate, say, that person doesn't have enough experience or they don't have enough time in government. The orthodoxy has convinced Americans that if you have not spent your entire life or half of your life or most of your career in the system that doesn't work, you somehow cannot work in the system. That is the most backwards and twisted thinking that I've ever heard, but it's the product of low-quality ideas foisted upon us by association and also by osmosis. The second rule of this orthodoxy is that you have to speak in a manner that appeals to the most people, and that is oftentimes a cruel euphemism for not telling the truth, sacrificing the truth on the altar of expediency. Why do you think you get politicians, Americans? Why do you think you get politicians that speak in talking points, that go to their time, to their sort of focus groups that they hire for their political consultants, and they get their talking points from them and they come out to the trail? Why do you think a lot of politicians in America refuse to actually go on mainstream media and go into leftist media and actually go into opposition media and debate their ideas soundly? Because that's not the premise of our current old world system. In fact, that goes against it. And really, another rule of this orthodoxy that I think is actually quite cruel and quite unfair is that your entire political existence and credibility rests on you affirming the first two principles. My friends, Vivek Ramaswamy takes a sledgehammer rather, to that foul orthodoxy in the best way possible. I mentioned Barry Goldwater because those of you who are old enough to remember, this is before my time, but Barry Goldwater was a candidate that the establishment absolutely hated, the progressives absolutely hated, but he spoke from a place of core first principles and sound philosophy, much like Vivek. And not only that, but he wrote a book called The Conscience of a Conservative, which basically mapped out the future of the conservative movement in that one book and the justification for it. He stuck to higher ideals as opposed to focusing on the temporal issues of his day. And once again, Vivek does that. But going into my reasons as to why I think that Vivek is the best choice for all Americans, but especially Gen Z, there are a few things that our country needs to handle. We need to have a cultural revival, an intellectual revival, and then a corresponding political revival. If you want to have a political revival, that cannot happen in a vacuum. It has to happen on the heels of a cultural revival, and a cultural revival can only happen if the culture is fed healthy ideas which help it grow and help it reach a new level. So you must have an intellectual revival. So following that course of thought, political revival is preceded by a cultural revival, and a cultural revival is preceded by an intellectual revival. We must ask ourselves the question, why is it important for us to have an intellectual revival in America? Well, Gen Z, my generation, is the first generation to grow up entirely consumed by the digital medium, by phones, by computers, by things that displace our sense of community and reality, by filtering it through numbers and digits and this virtual world. Now, for many reasons, the internet has been a wonderful invention. The internet is the culmination of, I think, many thousands of years of human innovation and human creativity that man has used to bend the natural world to ensuring that his ends are met efficiently. That is basically what civilization, the process of creating civilization, is simply one long habituated process of man being creative, being intelligent, and being incisive about what the nature of reality is, and then bending those resources to benefit his ends, which then, as a consequence, benefit the whole of this sub-civilization. The Wright brothers, who simply wanted to find a different way to transport themselves in a more efficient way, that spawned an entire industry which connects people that are thousands of miles apart and connects economies that are thousands of miles apart, makes prices low, and makes human prosperity grow and enlarge. And I can cite so many different innovations, the light bulb. All were attempts to reckon with the limitations that we were dealing with at that time. So the internet is just a culmination of that. But having said that, unlike the innovations of our previous era, the internet is all-encompassing. The internet and the algorithms have literally changed how many people in my generation's brains work. In fact, the reasons why you oftentimes hear that Gen Z people 18, 19, 20, 21, 22, 23 like me, that they have short attention spans is primarily because of the internet. If you analyze the empirical record from previous generations, and you look at what their attention spans were, then you look at what the Gen Z's attention spans are, you can see a very stark difference. You go from being able to sustain reading dense texts for like a few hours to only being able to, on average, entertain certain kinds of content for 60 seconds or a minute. That is what the internet has done to so many people in my generation. And when your faculty of reason, your ability to understand the world, is weakened by impatience, then you will be vulnerable to bad ideas. And you will be vulnerable to bad actors who use those ideas to manipulate you or direct your life towards a conclusion that is not beneficial to you, and that very well may be immoral. This is why most young people are leftists. This is one of the primary reasons why. Because our intellectual defenses have been weakened by the digital medium, and bad actors have taken advantage of that. They have utilized passion over logic and reason, and they have made our politics a game of passion and conflict, as opposed to a game of understanding issues, a game of intellection, a game of actually investigating what it is that we need to understand. But Vivek talks about the importance of a cultural revival, rather an American revival as opposed to a national divorce, all the time. And he talks always about the word first principles, the ideas that our entire system is built upon, which everything in our politics assumes. And he argues passionately from that point of conviction. Why is this going to spark an intellectual revival? Very simply. If you can justify what you believe, if you have a foundation for what you believe, then my friends, I promise you, you will be able to sustain a set of values. And if you're able to sustain a set of values, you will be able to also understand certain ideas and certain ways the world works in a way that's not just superficial, but in a way that is beneficial to your overall edification. If you want to have a healthy culture, you must have people in that culture who are healthy in their minds and other ways as well. And I believe that if a candidate like Vivek that raises the level of discourse through his emphasis on philosophical rigor and logic can very well deliver that to us, not even by winning, which I do believe that will happen, but merely by speaking the way he speaks, talking the way he talks, and encouraging people to model that example of higher intellectual thinking and acting that is oftentimes besmirched and swept under the rug by political analysis and political media and many folks in politics today. In fact, Vivek even mentions the clickbait conservatives, these people on social media that claim to be conservative when in all reality they don't have a single idea what that word even means. I'm not going to name names, but there are a lot of influencers out there that are not giving any of you fruit. They're not giving any of you edification. They are giving you what you want to hear. They're tickling your ears, and they're bending you to make themselves richer and more famous. They're not actually helping you understand the world or philosophy or history or anything that will benefit you. He calls these people out because they have spread several egregious lies about him and his path, all to make a quick buck on the gullibility of their huge followings. So again, it's important to have someone constantly engaging this. Now, the cultural revival will come from this intellectual revival. If you think about the state of American culture right now, we have several things happening. We have a culture where in many cases, especially amongst many young spaces, there is a blind allegiance to particular ideas without actually questioning what they mean. Amongst many Gen Zers, as the data will show, and this is true for both Republicans and Democrat ones, there is a general appreciation of social justice. There is a general allegiance with movements like Black Lives Matter and Planned Parenthood. And, for example, the March for Our Lives. Remember the March for Our Lives, the sort of so-called organic, actually astroturf movement, which was meant to push gun control in the wake of the Stoneman Douglas shooting down in Florida, which David Hogg, Cameron Gasky, Emma Gonzalez, a few other people kind of just rose from the ranks of obscurity and became the voices of the pro-gun lobby. That movement was populated by people in my generation, people who were easily swayed by their passions. Now, an intellectual revival would have gotten ahead of that problem by encouraging those same people to think a little bit deeper about what they support. And even if they had ended up supporting gun control in the first place, at least it would have been from a place of reason and not a place of emotion. But the problem is our culture, the condition of our culture, can be very much summed up in one sentence: that we feel more than we think, that we act out of feeling more than we act out of reason, and that we don't have the proper concepts. You probably haven't heard of this before. We don't have the proper concepts to organize our actions by. Understand this, my friends. In order to have good actions, you have to have good ideas that precede them. So you need to have the proper concepts to order your actions by. And I'm going to indict the right here a little bit too. If all you're hearing in the media, if your prominent social and political commentators are just throwing red meat, attacking people, calling people rhinos, and using all of these thought-terminating cliches that don't actually bring you to a higher place of understanding, what do you expect to receive? Every input has an output. What do you expect the output will be from that? It'll be nothing short of trash, garbage, and terrible thinking. Again, the cultural revival will come from the ground up, but it can be sparked by someone who sits atop the cultural and political institution that is the government. And that's why I believe Vivek is so powerful, because he says that we have a crisis of values in America. When you don't have God, or you don't have some higher purpose within your heart, there will be a hole the size of God that will be filled by some other kind of trash that isn't beneficial to you. He mentions that, and he is correct. So in all reality, and this is why I like him so much, he's not running a political campaign. He's really running a moral campaign. And politics is just the vehicle for him to get to where he needs to get. But he's running a campaign that goes beyond the letter of policy, that goes beyond what the establishment and the GOP or others would like to see. And he's really trying to nail down the issue of values that is so prevalent in our culture. Understand, culture emerges from values. What is culture? Culture, by definition, is merely the practices of a particular group of people in a particular area defined by their understanding of the world. That's why when you go to Asia or you go to South America, you have different cultures, because you have different peoples with different understandings of the world. So we have to ensure that people have the right worldviews, and that goes back to filling that God-shaped hole in people's individuals are. That goes back to ensuring that there is a strong foundation of values within the heart of people, and a president can inspire that, and that's why I think Vivek is the best person for that. Now, let's go into political revival. The culture is great. The intellect is great. When we got those things done, that's great. But how people think about the world and see the world impact how they vote, impact how they interact with the government as well. And I oftentimes believe that politicians in office right now are just reflections of the desires of their people. Consent and harm are the two moral foundations of any just society, and certainly of the American constitutional order. And when you have a country built on consent, consent is merely a tool. But if that tool is not informed by good ideas, that tool can be used for very bad purposes. So someone can give their consent to be a drunk and drink alcohol, but they may end up developing scoliosis of the liver and dying a premature death. Similarly, someone may give their consent to be governed, which is a complicated philosophical issue, but we're going to just assume it for now, and yet not have the right mechanisms and the right ideas to select those who do govern, therefore creating a bad government. This is how we get 50, 60, 70 plus years of establishment rule in America. This is how we get the defense contractors and the special interests being the primary movers of our government. This is how we get bribes and money and lobbying being the movers of our government, as opposed to sound philosophical principles, because the governed are not practicing informed consent. We have uninformed consent of the governed, which I'm not entirely sure can truly be estimated as real consent. That's a different matter, different day. But in any case, we need that principle of informed consent to actually be informed consent. And that can only happen once there's a cultural revival, but that also can only happen as well, can only be effective once that cultural revival takes root in the political understanding of our nation. So, what does this look like? Well, Vivek has proposed so many different policies. Abolishing the FBI, for example, an institution which has worked very hard to violate the foundations of our republic, violate the Constitution, to pursue the goals of whoever's in power. Look at COINTELPRO. Look at all the operations the FBI has done over its very arduous and terrible history, where they have targeted political dissenters, where they have targeted peaceful people that simply disagree with the common narrative of the day, and they targeted them for wiretapping, for destabilization, for demoralization, in the case of Fred Hampton, assassination. Well, a country that has a healthy culture would reject such institutions in their nation, and they would seek to abolish them. And that's what Vivek is talking about. He's talking about, on the basis of a sound culture and sound ideas from that culture, abolishing these rogue institutions. So again, Vivek is really the only candidate talking about doing these things and talking about doing them from the proper condition. Now, let's talk about me a little bit. I'm someone who has a very deep admiration for America. I'm someone who has a very deep admiration that's not really shared by my generation for what America could be, what it was in the past, and what it could be. Because America was not perfect in our past, but my God, in the founding generation, you couldn't even put a tax on whiskey without the citizens uprising and saying, no, you can't have my possessions like that. I don't support that. But today, you can have several different taxes. You can spy on them without warrants. You can wiretap them. You can hold their property, eminent domain, without due process. You can do so many different things, and the majority of Americans don't even bat an eye. I'm someone who believes America can return to those moral foundations which made us so great, and I think still makes us, in many cases, the greatest country on the earth, if we have the proper leadership. And I think that Vivek is the best choice that we have right now. If I was back in the 60s, I would say Barry Goldwater would be the best choice we have right now, but Vivek is the best choice we have right now. Now, I'm not a partisan normally. I am a ideas person. I'm someone who cares about ideas. And so I don't just talk about Vivek, I talk about a bunch of different issues. But when I see someone, all of us, by virtue of us being human beings, are vessels for higher ideas. We are vessels for ideas, and us being vessels for ideas puts an emphasis on character, and I'll close here. Vivek, being the father of 2 boys, being a husband, being someone who refuses to take big super PAC money, being someone who will literally put his own money that he's earned over his career, millions of dollars, into his own campaign so he can remain independent, shows inestimable character. Character that everyone, in my opinion, should admire and respect. Character that everyone, in my opinion, can look up to. Character that everyone, in my opinion, if everyone undertook the same kind of route, not becoming rich, but simply being family people, having family values, being responsible, being independent in your thoughts, being morally convicted, following Emerson's edict that a foolish consistency is the hobgoblin of little minds, and that you should really rely on yourself, rely on your own thoughts, as opposed to being directed by the thoughts of the collective. If more people pursued that kind of moral acting, I really believe America would be in a much better place than it is right now. So for all these reasons and more, I humbly submit to you that Vivek Ramaswamy is the best candidate to both inspire the young generation, my generation, but also to lead America to its next revival. Now, my friends, I don't just talk about Vivek. This is a channel that talks about a lot of things. So if you could do me a favor, subscribe to this channel, like this video, comment on this video, share this video. Please watch my other content. I have videos coming out almost every single day around 4:30 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. That's the new schedule. So please watch the content, subscribe to this channel, share this video, be a part of the revolution of the mind, which is my own project, in which I will attempt to bring America from our current dry place into a level of intellectual edification and richness, where we challenge ourselves to learn new ideas, to think deeper about issues, to go back to philosophy, to go back to using our reason to its highest capacity. Be a part of that revolution, my friends. Be a part of the revolution of the mind. Support this channel. Comment, like, share, subscribe. Donate to our Patreon. Join our locals community, christianwatts.locals.com. Join our Discord, which is in the comment section down below. I love you guys so much, and please, forever and eternally, stay pensive. Bye, everyone.